Financing for Development, Unlocking Investment Opportunities. What is development? With Jan Eliasson.
The first three words of the UN Charter is "We the Peoples." This organization, United Nations, was created to serve the peoples of the world. They wanted to leave behind the scourge of war. They want to live in life in liberty and in dignity. And they wanted to live in a society where the equal worth of all human beings was realized on all levels and all fronts and in all nations. Justice also between men and women, large nations, small nations. Now, if I were a 16-year-old boy or girl, I would read that charter again and say, this is what we have to aim for. And this is what I expect my government, the leaders of our community, to deliver. And this means that they have the right to a life where they do not live in extreme poverty, a life where they get a decent education, a life where they have the right to being treated in hospitals and clinics, a life where children's lives are saved early on, a life where you can drink clean water, a life where your human rights are respected, a life where your structures, your institutions are reliable and non-corrupt. All these requests that came from the Charter after this horrible period ending with the Second World War, all these promises that we try to formulate need to be translated into realities. Development means so much, both for the world and for the individual human being. Development is a life in peace. Development is a life without poverty and without inequalities. Development is respect of human rights and the belief in governance and in good and strong institutions. So in this world today, there is no peace without development. And there is no development without peace, and none of the above without respect of human rights. So what we need to understand is that we have to bring all factors together at the same time and realize that we have a common agenda across peace, development, and human rights. And if we attach ourselves to that philosophy, then we can make a difference. And that's what we have to do now, this period of 2015 to 2030. In 2000, we set the 8 Millennium Development Goals, very practical, concrete ones, from education to water and sanitation, to child mortality, to maternal health, etc. Only one, though, related to the responsibility of all nations, namely the goal related to partnerships. These goals were very useful. They were used by member states in their economic planning, and much was achieved, not least in fighting poverty in Asia and education, where I think we made huge strides forward. But much was left unfinished, and particularly maternal health and sanitation were areas where we certainly did not reach the results. So we find ourselves now in the year 2015 to have achieved some of the objectives of the Millennium Development Goals, but we have still a lot to do on the goals that were set in the year 2000. But what is new is that we are now broadening and deepening the understanding of development. And then we have to understand that today the borderline between international and national is slowly but surely disappearing, because the goals that we have to reach into sectors which are classically considered domestic affairs. In other words, we have to deal with the energy issues, with transportation, with industry, with agriculture, all these sectors that classically in the past were seen as domestic. Now they are also international. So what we need to do is a sense of understanding in this world today that the good international formula is in the national interest. This is perhaps the most important conclusion from the work on the goals. The Sustainable Development Goals is a reflection of the situation in the world today. They reflect that we need peace, they reflect that we need development, they reflect that we need respect of human rights and rule of law. We need the SDGs even more than we needed the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, because these goals are, I would say, transformational. They represent a new way of thinking. There were many who said that, there are far too many goals and they are far too complex. But I say, well, they are complex. They are many because the world is complex. And we need to today marry the international perspective with the regional and national, even local perspective. And we must understand that development will only be possible if it builds on some basic principles, namely shared responsibilities. I would say shared solidarity. The member states now have done a tremendously good job by identifying a possible road ahead. There are those who say that this is far too idealistic. We cannot achieve this. But I am a disciple of a Secretary General by the name of Dag Hammarskjöld. He said something which has been very important in my life. He said that the future is two things. The future is the horizon and the vision. Your life needs to have a horizon and a vision. And what you deal with, the challenges, you have to have a horizon vision. But then he also said, which I think is even more important, the future is also the step you take tomorrow. In other words, we need a vision in order to take the right steps. And the vision is set by these new goals. Very high ambition, I agree, I admit. But they also show the kind of steps we can take to reach that vision. Those steps cannot be directed from the United Nations 38th floor. They have to be taken by nations, by local communities, and they have to be understood and fought for by the people in the world who are affected if this vision is being reached. The goals now are containing such issues like transfer of technology, the great challenge of migration. We have the issue of urbanization, 60% of humanity living in cities, with what that implies in terms of pressure on resources and infrastructure. Industrialization, much needed for countries in Africa to move from exporting raw material to advancing their own industry. All this is a much more dynamic set of goals. But these new goals are all universal. The most universal dimension is, of course, the sustainability dimension, the global climate change perspective. We can't even do anything if we don't have work on sustainability. Everything we do has to be sustainable. Sustainability is absolutely crucial. And universality and sustainability come together. This is changing consumption and production patterns. Here we are in the same boat. We either swim or we sink together. This is an existential issue. So the new dynamics of the new goals is this sense that we are all engaged and that we are all obligated to work for their achievement. That requires very, very strong advocacy and knowledge about these goals, and that they realize that it is not only a question of the old donor community's relationship to the recipients in the developing world. It is now an issue of the welfare of these countries, the most vulnerable countries, is in fact in the interest of the countries who have been more fortunate and are more fortunate. I would hope that we would instill a new sense of solidarity in the world, that we realize that the success of your neighbors, and we are all neighbors in this world, is also your own success. And I would also hope that these goals help us in the United Nations, the World Bank, IMF, and the regional banks. I hope that we learn that we will not be able to achieve our goals, our objectives, unless we work together. The most important thing is the implementation of the goals, that they turn into reality, not only on the international arenas, but also on the national and even the local levels. The implementation, the realization of these goals on the goal is absolutely crucial. We, from the United Nations, will try to help the member states to achieve these goals. We will do our very, very best to be using our regional offices, but also, of course, our country teams to be helpful in the government's efforts to make these goals realities. This is one of the issues that we need to think about. But then also, we live in a day and age of complete different communications possibilities. We need to have the support of the people and the knowledge of the people of these goals. They should know that the member states have signed on to these objectives, and therefore the advocacy for the goals and the study of the goals and them becoming living realities for civil society, for the scientific community, the academic world, the private sector, you and me, is absolutely crucial. The time is over when the top-down methods are the ones that achieve results. We need to have a strong combination of strong leadership on the basis of principles, not least these goals, but also we need to have engaged, knowledgeable citizens who know what direction the world needs to go and who are participants in this process. And I've seen in the last 3 years, not least with Secretary Ban Ki-moon and President Kim, a very strong and growing relationship between the Bretton Woods system and the United Nations. But I've also seen the development of the regional banks come in. I've seen the growing relationship, positive relationship with the private sector, with the academic world. That's the direction we have to go. In my view, we should put the problem in the center, and then we should ask who can do something about it. We should not start from the institutional perspective, the silo perspective. We should start from respect for the problem, gather around that problem, and then achieve, in the end, some type of informal or even formal division of labor. We are actually entering a new phase of development, a new paradigm, a much broader and much, in my view, wiser reflection of the need for the mobilization of all actors if we are to make a difference in this world.